legislation for the 2017 General Assembly session on this issue brought by Senator DeStefano.
All right, any questions? All right, let's go to one that shouldn't take too much time.
I don't know if Senator Locke's going to do hers from the phone, and I can do.
Let's go ahead and do short-term rentals.
Okay.
While you're on the roll. So it's on before lunch.
Very good. Very good. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the privilege of chairing this work group. That is highest honor.
Well, thank you so much for your 12 hours of lunch with
service, 12 months. I also want to thank the work group members because their seat time and endurance was significant, and I think all who participated, both the membership, actual legislators, other members of the work group, members of the Housing Commission, those in the public who attended the meetings, certainly staff put a lot of hard work into the endeavor. I think all would agree that they learned a lot about the issue, learned a lot about the complexities that are presented, and I think that what we have the option of today is to continue to advance that conversation. We have done significant due diligence, as the chairman referred, over 12 hours of hearing. We have embraced, or at least heard, how we might as a state embrace the sharing economy and the important role that Virginia may play in this particular question in the nation. So I would say that for members of the commission that we've made progress based on the charge that the enactment clause on Senator Vogel's bill presented us for consideration. The work group actually approved and forwarded for the commission's consideration several principles that any bill on this subject would address and would need to address sufficiently in the General Assembly session upcoming. I imagine there will be a number of bills, or there's certainly the potential for a number of bills to be introduced, and so the work group, given the time that we had, forwarded certain principles as a 3 or 4 part test that those bills would have to be judged by. Council has, and so to that end, there's a draft in your binder, which is not necessarily a reflection of the consensus of the work group, but it was an attempt that Council has made to further the policy, the issue, and the conversation that we've had for the past year. I want to thank Lisa Wallmeyer and Elizabeth publicly for their hours of dedication. I know Council has done a valiant job to try to bring some cohesion to disparate parties and interests and the various stakeholders that have manifested over the past 12 months or so. I know that this commission works by consensus, and the chair really hopes that that is the case in anything that we might recommend to the General Assembly. My perception is that local government will be the one stakeholder that would be reticent to any embracing of any principles at this time. I think they're just simply opposed and want local control over that issue, and we respect that and understand that position. In terms of the principles that were outlined, Elizabeth does a great job. We record all of our sessions, and then she transcribes minutes. It's quite a voluminous set of information, but just to try to distill it down to its most simplest form in terms of the principles that the work group analyzed and forward for recommendation, would be that any legislation would apply to all types of properties, statewide policy, but differentiate between properties using a tiered system regarding primary and secondary residences. The other statewide component would be the central tax collection and remittance to localities, and there would be a local option for ministerial registration. And that's in response to repeated requests for information from the local government to know where this activity is occurring and taking place. And I think that's actually a very reasonable request on behalf of localities for a ministerial or de minimis registration requirement. To that end, we would also, though, have an exception for licensed realtors who are in the trade. That was a specific request of industry, and also the property managers who deal in that same type of commerce. So really sort of distilling down, if I can, to the most simplest, the three-part test would be as I've stated. And that would be what I would hope that we would consider in terms of a recommendation, whether we have a quorum or not, that the sense of the commission would be that we would want a statewide solution to the problem, and it would contain those elements. If anyone gets the clips, every day I feel like there's a different question, conundrum, issue raised in a different part of the state, and I think we're just going to get to the point where it's going to be hard to discern and difficult for the market to have any success in any uniform way. So, Mr. Chairman, I present that as a summary report of our work, and thanks for all those who contributed and participated along the way.
Well, thank you, Delegate Peace, and the people who served on that. I think this kind of shows why we have a housing commission. You know, we had this bill that came forward, and, you know, if we had to try to get this done in session, it would just never happen. Not quite sure it's going to happen now, but at least we had 12 hours of thought about this. So could you go back over those three, was it three, to make sure that we all...
Yeah, 3 or 4. I mean, if Mr. Chairman, you say there needs to be a statewide solution to this issue, and that solution would apply to all types of properties and differentiate between properties using a tiered system related to primary and secondary residences. There would be a central point of tax collection. We heard from tax. They're very comfortable with the software. They're very comfortable with how the process would work. And that has been the case since January in terms of the position of the tax department. Then there would be a local option for a ministerial or de minimis registration requirement, those conducting that commerce in a particular jurisdiction to that local government, with the small exceptions for a licensed realtor and property managers. So that really would capture the individual who says, you know, for a few nights a year, I would really like to make a little extra money and let my residents to someone using the online platform, which most commonly is known as Airbnb, although there are others.
All right, so questions in. So let's go get a little, get a little bit closer. You know, so at 30,000 feet, let's go to 3 feet. So the statewide solution. Talk to us a little bit more about that. How you see that in the 12 hours y'all spent. Define that a little bit closer.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I would just say it would be like any other legislation that we have in terms of applicability, unless there are exceptions or carve-outs, or we're directing it only to particular jurisdictions. We've seen where that can be problematic, where we get the Christmas tree effect. Each jurisdiction wants to join a particular regime that has been embraced by state lawmakers, and it wouldn't solve the problem of the Madras effect of the Commonwealth, where everybody is treating this particular industry in a different way. There's a lot of analogies made to Uber, and I think that's probably warranted in one respect in terms of the sharing economy, but in terms of practical implementation, we have DMV as a central contact. In this case, the analogy may be more on tax for that purpose, but in terms of land use and other issues that are local in nature, we have over 100 jurisdictions, and so to apply evenly and across the board a set of standards that would govern in this particular industry, this activity in the Commonwealth.
Okay, so then the next was all types of property. Explain the tiered system.
Well, I think that's to be determined to the extent that there is such a infrequent activity or such infrequent transactions that many in the work group believe that they shouldn't require any reporting, any type of registration. Then there is a step up from that, which would be dealing with other periods of time, and then one beyond that for greater periods of time, and then the different types of residences. If the commissioners will recall, my legislation in the House, which passed the House, dealt only with primary residences. But there were concerns raised from various parts of the Commonwealth that we wanted to have some governance over the secondary residences or vacation homes, particularly in the Virginia Beach region. There were other parts of the state that were also represented. So that I think is something that can be worked out, but you have to get through the first question, which is whether there should be a statewide policy, and that should apply in all circumstances, in all jurisdictions.
Okay. Then central tax collection. I assume that we're talking about either a county or either a city or even a town would collect, and then they would make the payment.
That would be what the local governments would prefer. Based on the nature of this enterprise, a central remittance to tax and then distribution from that central point back to localities pro rata based on the level of activity occurring in those jurisdictions. There is certain software that can be tested that we had presentations on by Mr. Mark Haskins that the tax department is comfortable with, and very similar to how retail sales and uses collected and then sent back to localities based on what they are properly owed. So the platform would essentially collect the tax at the booking registration, and those are technical terms, but essentially take that portion and send it to tax. Tax would send it to the localities.
All right, and then finally, a local option. Explain how broad that is.
Local option. The local option would be that, it kind of going back to the tiered concept, where there would be ministerial registration based on the frequency of that activity in a particular residence, in a particular dwelling. So if someone is doing it several weeks of the year, that would trigger the registration. And that's in response to local government's concern that these are things that are happening too often in their minds, and they don't know where they're happening until something is reported to law enforcement or there's some other concern for safety or welfare, etc. So I believe, and this is maybe more my personal view, but I think it's the sense of the work group, that a ministerial registration is certainly reasonable in that regard.
All right, so what the short-term rental work group is asking or requesting is a little bit different than a policy in the past for Housing Commission, is that you're not asking us to move this bill forward. What you're asking for are those 4 bullet points to go forward as a recommendation from the Housing Commission that any bill that passes House, passes Senate, goes to the governor would have those 4 bullet points in it.
That's correct.
Okay. All right. Questions? Yes, Dave.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And this is kind of a question directed at Delegate Peace to help me kind of get a sense of where I want to go today. And so I guess first let me just say this is a really good process, and I want to congratulate Delegate Peace on organizing this. It was 12 hours, but it was 12 hours well worth participating in, and I very much appreciate that. My intent, what I would like to see happen, is to make sure that the process doesn't stall. I see great utility in making sure that the stakeholders continue to focus and move forward with the possibility of coming up with a resolution during the 17 session. I guess where I'm struggling is whether my concerns can be reconciled with the 4 principles that have been laid out. And so that's kind of the question that I wanted to go ahead and pose to you. I do see utility in some kind of statewide framework. I think that would be very, very helpful. I see utility in the hosting platform, collecting those taxes, both as a service and also to make sure that you're not presenting liability for those who might not be as diligent about collecting and submitting those taxes to the localities. I do remain very concerned about remitting those up to the state level and then having those come back to the local level, both from an enforcement standpoint and also an accuracy standpoint. My Commissioner of Revenue has expressed on numerous times frustration with the existing system where people get confused all the time between Fairfax County and the city of Fairfax. So I wanted to see if, number one, one of the principles you had in there, whether that is something that could still be considered and accommodated. The other part is that I do remain concerned about the infringement on local zoning authority. And I'm not sure to what degree we could still work within those parameters. I actually kind of liked where the bill that came out last Friday went, where it was a bifurcation between the de minimis and then anything above that 14 days you could continue to go ahead and regulate just like any other zoning use. I know that 14 isn't a magic number, but I thought it provided at least a bright line, and I know local governments are completely happy with that, but it seemed to be headed in the right direction. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'd love to get a response from Delegate Peace about whether those concerns could be accommodated within that policy framework, because I do want to see the process continue on. I don't want to shut it down here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Delegate Bulba. You're always a very valued member of any body that considers housing policy. I speak from experience on our subcommittee of general laws in the House, and always are raising very important questions for our consideration. And thank you for embracing a statewide framework. I think the concept of the ministerial registration and the concerns that you raise from your local government about accuracy will work in tandem as you're able to remit to the tax department and then have that delivered back to the locality. When you're above a certain number of transactions, if you will, the frequency of days is triggering that registration, there will be a way to kind of understand how that lines up with the taxes that are collected and then sent back. I can assure you that the tax department wouldn't mislead us in the sense that the software that's used is well respected nationally, is one of the Cadillacs of software that allows for that to be conducted. And I think that going to our statewide concept as well, having that central point of tax collection and remittance back to localities furthers that type of commerce and makes it easier for those who have hosting platforms to be able to link up with actual hosts to provide that service. So I think that your concerns are certainly well taken, but I think that the principles actually really address many of those concerns, if not all of them.
Mr. Chairman, Delegate Knight would like it on record that he, although he's not here today, that he is in favor of registration at a local level and throughout the state, but he wants zoning and taxes also to remain at a local level.
Okay, thank you. Other questions? George?
Mr. Chair, as the person who made the motion at the last work group meeting on this, trying to recall everything that was built into that motion, I think that we do have the framework that has been laid out here and was laid out in the submission that we got from Peace. But I also recall, if I'm correct, I want to make sure I'm correct, that we had asked the stakeholders to continue to meet to see if they could come up with something that they could all agree with that would be consistent with these principles. And I assume the fact that we have not heard that there has been success on that means they may well have met, but they have not reached agreement on things. And I just want to make sure that that is my interpretation.
That's right.
Inference there is correct.
And Mr. Chairman, Senator Barker, you are correct. That was the directive, and Ms. Wallmeyer did a great job to try to advance that conversation. The bill that was put in your folder does not represent consensus among the stakeholders in terms of peace in the valley, but certainly is part of the conversation going forward within the structure that the work group has outlined. And I'm hopeful that that will advance this conversation. It's been interesting, I shared with the chairman earlier, to have worked with some of the stakeholders who at the beginning were extremely opposed to any legislation, who now really want legislation. And those who really wanted legislation are okay with no legislation. And so, yeah, that seems to be the art of a good negotiation, right? If everybody is unhappy or otherwise. So I think that we are moving forward, and the motion that you made in the work group and outlining these principles, I think will stand us well in the session to judge any draft or bill that's filed.
Just a quick comment, Mr. Chair, if I might. I think that what is outlined here is a proper step forward. I think what we need to do is, rather than coming up with specifics today, is see if the stakeholders can reach agreement. My assessment of things is they're not as far apart as many people thought they would be at this point. And so I think that it's certainly possible to reach a compromise and consensus on things. I think the issues surrounding primary residence, secondary residence, the de minimis, the tiering, those are the critical things that need to be worked out. And I think those can best be worked out among the stakeholders. Obviously, if they don't do that, we'll have to step in and take that on. But I would certainly love to see them take a crack at it and see if they could reach agreement on that. I think one of the concerns I had about the draft here is it sort of started at one end of the spectrum, and there's a lot more that could be considered. And for example, it lists a de minimis use as only for primary residents for 14 days, so that someone who has a vacation home and they want to use it once a year would not even be covered by a de minimis. And also, I think there are certainly events, the cycling championships that were here, the marathon that's here in November, where there are people who might be willing to participate on for some special event like that, but would not be regular users. And I think we need to be able to provide options, protections for those.
Okay. Questions? Yes, Senator Shem.
Well, and first, I guess, partly a statement, partly a question, and if I may, Mr. Chairman, I thank you for your time, and certainly I thank Delegate Pease for the hard work that he's put into this, and I know there have been some trying times, and certainly I wish I could have been involved in more of the work group. They always seem to be scheduled when I couldn't be there. I don't know that that was intentional after my first appearance.
There would have been more trying times if you were there, I think.
It was 16 hours anyway.
But you were greatly missed.
And I missed it too. I must say that, without a consensus, and certainly I want to thank Ms. Wallmeyer on a great effort, and I looked over the transcript. We certainly have had an email exchange, and I looked over the transcript and thought she captured as best she could exactly where at least Senator Barker was. And of course, nothing is perfect, but I think, with this all being all over the map every now and then, I think she did the best she could. I'm actually pleased with her attempts here, and as much as I have concerns about Airbnb and this type of sharing economy issue, I certainly think that this bill gives me the least amount of agita that I've had about this issue. My concern is, Mr. Chairman and members of this committee, is that without a consensus, and as we're seeing right now in certain jurisdictions, including Arlington most recently, we have some localities that are passing, and I think acting upon the powers that we give them with relation to zoning and land use and the like. My concern that I have is that this company has shown itself, Airbnb in particular, to engage in a particular course of aggressive litigation in cities such as San Francisco and New Orleans and New York City, suing those local jurisdictions when the local jurisdictions put in place certain regulations that the company does not like. And in doing so, dragging them through that litigation at a cost. These larger cities such as San Francisco and New Orleans, Mr. Chairman, can certainly maybe bear the cost of a legal challenge. I'm concerned that our jurisdictions like Arlington and even Franklin County, or smaller jurisdictions that put in reasonable regulations at this time, if there is no bill, will be subjected to the litigation tactic. I think they probably have done a risk analysis, as they mostly do, and have decided that on a cost benefit, this is much more in line with their belief in their business model, that we're going to see that litigation while we try to work this out. I would think that totally unwise on the part of the corporation, but I have seen them take actions that have been, I think, counterproductive, including but not limited to, Mr. Chairman, the fact that this city right here that we are sitting in, the city of Richmond, does not allow for such short-term rentals, and this company continues to flout the law, even having a button on their platform which allows you to rent through Airbnb a place in Richmond while it is illegal. I do not believe that any corporate model or corporation should promote, support, or ignore, or should support criminal activity or ignore the law. That is one of my biggest concerns that I've seen in doing this. And maybe their belief is, Mr. Chairman, that we in the government are creaky and slow, their machine works slowly, the wheels turn slowly, and therefore we must catch up to them and submit to them, rather than they making sure that they comport with the traditions, laws, and values of the Commonwealth of Virginia. So that is one of my concerns, that Arlington, quite frankly, I think, if everybody was happy with the Arlington model, if Airbnb was happy with that, then maybe we could even make progress on that. But what I understand is that even though an Airbnb representative said publicly in the newspaper that they were satisfied with the Arlington result, that in fact I've heard that that is not a model that they want repeated anywhere else. No legislation right now. What we're talking about is making a recommendation, Mr. Chairman, that 4 points, as Delegate Pease, that Delegate Pease has made, should not be the only ones. I think there needs to be some acknowledgement that as we as a state government, under the Dillon Rule, limit what our local governments can and cannot do and sometimes tie their hands in terms of revenue generation and regulations, that zoning laws, land use, safety, health and safety issues, we've left to the province of those localities to make determinations for themselves. There may be many more points than the 4 points that we've talked about that should be explored in recognition of really the rights of those local governments to make determinations based on the citizens that they serve at the local level. I'm reminded that I like to say sometimes about this issue, if I wanted to live next to a hotel, I would have bought a house next to a Marriott or a Holiday Inn. There are those out there who are neighbors of people who are renting an Airbnb who probably don't like that and worry about their home values. And what we must always remember, Mr. Chairman, is that my property rights, like my civil rights, ends where Delegate Peace's begins, or my neighbor begins. And sometimes we need to understand that there is a reason for zoning that respects that. That when people move into a quiet neighborhood, that's where they want to move into, not a commercial district. That they want to know their neighbors. They want to raise their children with at least some feeling of safety, not of some person coming in that they don't know that possibly could harm not only their quiet tranquility, but also their children. So I think there are more points that need to be done, that need to be looked at, Delegate. I think in addition, we have to look at issues of liability. I have asked over and over, Mr. Chairman, for the liability policy that they offered so freely when I guess I was cross-examining Airbnb's representative a little too tough. She offered this liability policy. I've asked for it. I've emailed and asked for it. I've never gotten it. My question here, and I think this state owes this level of protection, is to protect the consumer. And the consumer comes in two varieties. One is the person that uses the platform to rent their residence, Mr. Chairman, but also the end user who comes and rents that place as well. Because I'm telling you right now, I bet the insurance component of this, no insurance company provides a pack of insurance. I mean, I have rental properties in Charleston and in Wintergreen that I have commercial lease and liability premises, that your homeowner's policy is not going to cover. Or that at least the homeowner who may be wronged, or the person who is wronged in the home, when they seek insurance coverage, will find that that insurance company has filed for a reservation of rights or has denied coverage because they were contemplating the relationship created by this platform of Airbnb. That protection is not there. And without knowing what kind of liability protections through insurance is there, I have certain concerns that have not been answered. Finally, I think if you remember the two things, taxes, one of the questions I asked Mr. Chairman was, during the work group was, if Airbnb collects $100, or a person's renting out their room for $100, and they encourage them to collect the taxes, and so the taxes, let's say, are 10%, so it's $110. Then what is Airbnb's fee? Airbnb takes a fee, a percentage from, and they said, not the 100, but from the 110. Thereby, they were taking a percentage fee from taxes, taking a slice of what is money that should be returned to the locality. I don't have any assurances that that's not going to be the way, even in this draft, that the collection of the taxes won't be taxes minus their fee on the top of the taxes. Ultimately, Mr. Chairman, I think we need to make sure that we're paying more attention to the locality. I think ultimately what we need to do is we need to make sure that this industry understands and respects the law as established at the same time that we try to modify it to accommodate this new industry. If it is not willing to do that, Mr. Chairman, then I am unwilling to ever believe that we stand in any position to accommodate them to their liking and otherwise subject ourselves, our Commonwealth, our people, and our localities to ridiculous litigation because as a petulant child they did not get their way. And I thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Singh. Okay. Any other comments or? We understand now why it went 12 hours. There's a lot of passion about this.
And Mr. Chairman, this is Mark Lynn, for the record. Before I start, I think because I lecture on the Conflicts Act and write about it quite often, to the extent that some of my peeps call me Father Flynn at times, I probably should do the certification required by Section 2.2, 3114F, that And that is that the transaction of Airbnb or the short-term rental, the nature of my personal interest is that I represent the city of Richmond, Prince William County, Chesapeake, and those represented localities certainly are I'm part of a group of 3 or more, and I do certify that I can participate in the transaction fairly objectively and in the public interest. So with that disclosure aside, from the local government perspective, and I would ask if Elizabeth could hand out a letter from the city attorney for Fredericksburg. It actually captures the local government perspective very well. I thought it was just useful, and it doesn't take that long to read it. But on the tax part, the central collection, I think there's probably, this is me speaking, there's some room to maneuver there for sure. But the issue is that the state tax department, this isn't their tax, and they're not going to have the real incentive to do the auditing required to make sure for a given locality that the taxes are reported and paid accurately. And as a result of that, if there is a central tax collection, that's a matter for discussion, but the local tax official, usually the Commissioner of Revenue, should definitely have access not to some anonymous number, but access to the actual information where it's that commissioner's responsibility to determine whether local taxes are being collected and paid. So that's one part of the tax, that there needs to be access to the information. On the land use part, I think there certainly is some room for the de minimis activity where it would be treated in something of a ministerial manner, like a home occupation permit. That's, in my experience as a local government attorney, it's just as looking at what's the impact on the immediate neighbors. That's really what it's all about. It takes no time and doesn't really cost much money. So certainly willing to, I think local governments are very much willing to move forward and working on trying to come up with a solution that does work, but really have some concerns, and some of the Senator Stanley expressed and Delegate Vogel expressed very much the same thing. So thank you.
Okay. Other questions, thoughts? All right, so now, Senator Locke, you have a comment?
Senator Locke?
Sorry, I didn't get that.
Siri can fix this problem. Dear Siri, can you write a bill for this commission? Siri.
That was great timing. Okay. Do we have Senator Locke on the phone?
Senator Locke?
Does she have a comment?
Did you have a comment on Airbnb that you wanted to share?
It's in the letter. I can barely hear.
Well, we can hear you fine, so why don't you tell us, while we have a few minutes, that if you'd like to, about what your letter says.
Did you want me to read the letter to the commission?
Yes.
How many pages is it?
On behalf of Senator Locke, I'm sorry that exams at Hampton University set my attendance at the Virginia Housing Commission meeting on December 14, 2016. I know this is an important meeting with several matters to be decided before the start of the session.
Yeah, pull the mic a little bit closer to you.
I did want to share my thoughts on the short-term rental work group. I've spoken to local folks in Hampton and Newport News. This includes local government representatives as well as local B&B and Airbnb operators, all who are in agreement that short-term rentals should be under the purview of local government for zoning issues, permitting, as well as for taxation. My constituents specifically noted the current Airbnb listed accommodations are not held accountable by the health department, the fire department, code compliance, and they don't pay any related fees. There should be equity and fair competition in the playing field. Further, short-term rental owners are not promoting tourism and hospitality. They should be legitimized through certification so that vital tourism market is is
Situated.
accentuated. It is my understanding that San Francisco, the home base of Airbnb, now has, or soon will have, the technology to assist local governments with registration and reporting. This is great news and should be the same in Virginia. That is, universal registration of all short-term rentals, including occasional rentals at the local level. Commissioners of the revenue or local finance directors should have the same financial audit capabilities here as they have under existing law for other businesses. And registration will readily facilitate zoning and other laws that protect the public health, safety, and welfare. This is a fairness issue to me, as currently any home-based business has a registration and a taxation requirement with the local government. Likewise, I think the short-term rental companies should agree that they will delist and enforce compliance with bad actors. This will help local government immensely and keep all the good actors doing the right thing and hopefully continuing to be successful. I do understand that there are many short-term rental or Airbnb type operators that are managed by a licensed professional or a licensed bed and breakfast. I feel strongly that there should not be any additional registration requirements on these operators. Regarding the issue of taxation, I'd like to see local taxes collected at the local level. This makes sense to me and does not seem particularly onerous, as other national franchises have figured it out and do it routinely. Should it be the consensus of the Housing Commission to authorize state collection of local taxes, local governments should have the ability to audit at the local level. Further, some sort of kill switch and trustee language should ensure that localities get all the local tax dollars due them. Again, I'm sorry that I cannot be there today in person to share these concerns. I trust that this note represents my feelings on these issues, or more importantly, the feelings of those I represent. Thank you very much. Sincerely, Mamie Locke, Senate District 2.
So, Elizabeth, ask Senator Locke on the view close to see if she has any additional comments.
Senator Locke, do you have any additional comments for the group?
No, that represents my feelings on the matter.
Thank you very much.
All right, we've heard some more testimony. Do we have any questions? Thoughts? All right, moving forward then, do you want to make a motion?
As the chair of the work group, I don't know if we treat it like a subcommittee as though, you know, as we're in session where the recommendation of the subcommittee work group is the motion that doesn't require a second. Or if Mr. Barker, Senator Barker, who made that motion, would renew that now, that'd be more appropriate.
I'd be happy to renew the motion that I made at the last meeting of the work group, which would be to incorporate the points that have been outlined and to encourage the stakeholders to work to find some compromise and consensus on things to provide us a specificity to enact these.
Okay, so let's make sure we know what we're voting on. So, all right, what the recommendations are, as we talked about earlier, is that that what you would ask for, Senator Barker, is that a recommendation would come from the Housing Commission that we would have 4, and I'll mention them here in a second, that any bill would have, we're recommending them to have these 4. We can't tell people what to do, but what we're doing is a recommendation, right? And so that's a statewide solution, all types of property, the tiered system we talked about, central tax collection, and a local option. And so, in registration, for local option for the registration. All right, so in the House, they happen to go to, the bills will go to the subcommittee that you chair. All right, so.
I don't want to presume to know the mind of the Speaker of the House.
Well, that's it.
That was going to be the next question.
Right.
So in the past, these bills have gone to your subcommittee. So if a bill were to come forward that did not meet this, would that bill not receive favorable consideration?
Knowing, I don't want to bind members either, but knowing that Delegate Bulova serves on that subcommittee as well, And if the Chairman Gilbert were to refer that bill or bills to the subcommittee, we would have to have a hearing, but certainly would articulate the sense of this commission and demand as much as possible that we would incorporate those principles in any bill that would be recommended for reporting out of that subcommittee. And I would assume or believe that the Senate would operate in like fashion. So I know that we heard the comments passionately articulated by Senator Stanley for safety and health concerns, and I don't think that these principles are exclusive. In other words, it's really more including but not limited to in that sense. But this is a foundation or baseline that we would want to see in anything.
Okay, all right, so let's get this on the table here. So you made a motion that this is the four principles that you would like to recommend that would be in any bill, correct?
Yes, those along with things such as the recognizing the limitations such as HOA documents, those types of things, so that does not attempt to supersede those.
All right, so do we have a second? We have a motion and a second. Our discussion.
Mr. Chairman.
Please.
Mr. Chairman, my question with the motion on the floor, it sounds like to me that these four principles, and I don't know if it's including but not limited to is part of that language, which certainly I think we should not hamstring ourselves to just these four issues. But it seems implied in the recommendation, without stating, that it is this commission, that by voting for this, it would be this commission's recommendation, basically, that such localities could not prohibit, severely restrict and or prohibit Airbnb type companies from operating in their jurisdiction. Am I correct, sir?
You're asking the wrong one. Let's ask us, Delegate, please.
And not speaking for the person who made the motion, but speaking for him, I would say that it would open the door that this would be permitted activity across the Commonwealth, but with a certain structure in place to govern it in a uniform way.
Mr. Chairman, further question.
Yes, sir.
So this would only be parameters by which and limitations by which the locality could limit and or regulate the industry, but could not otherwise prohibit. Am I correct?
I would say that's
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. All right. Go.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I guess let me preface that I want to vote for something in an affirmative way, because I think that there is utility in what we're doing. I also want to keep my options open, and I'm a little nervous about the four principles, and so, you know, I want to kind of express support for some kind of statewide structure in a very broad sense, a desire to continue to move forward with the stakeholders, but not necessarily to limit ourselves to any of those four principles. And so I guess depending on how this initial vote goes, I might be voting no to keep my options open, but if we have another round, I might put that on the table, which I think does keep our options open, but also gives us at least a direction forward.
Well, this is a crazy place. I actually was a co-patron of the bill and then voted against it, so we can.
Mr. Chair, just to provide clarification on one point, in making the motion, I in no way was attempting to limit what's in a final bill to just these topics, and certainly the types of things that Senator Stanley and others have raised certainly could be incorporated in a final bill.
All right, so on the Senate side, I assume it goes to general laws also. Is that rough?
Mr. Chairman, may I please, and members of this committee, I would assume that this is going to come to local government, which I am the chairman of.
Uh-oh.
In fact, that's where it went before the patrons asked it to be referred to general laws last year. I don't know that I would grace or accept such a request this time.
So why do we have this whole discussion?
I have a question.
All right, we have a question on the phone.
Go ahead.
Okay, what's being proposed is a legislation that would create a statewide option, is that correct?
It's not a legislation.
I believe what is being proposed is, are some concepts, and yes, you're correct, we can provide a statewide option on some of the topics.
Okay, with the statewide options, taxation would be collected how?
I believe that's still under consideration, but it would be through the Department of Taxation and then through some sort of safe box given back, kept in the state government and given back to the localities.
Okay, all right.
All right, other comments? All right, so you made the motion, so you want to go forward with the motion?
Yes.
All right, so we have a second. You want to go forward, so any further discussion? Yes.
Review for me again, options for the localities here.
All right, he made the motion, so do what you
Yes, options for localities. Localities will receive the taxes. They will be collected by the entity providing the hosting platform, and then will be distributed to the appropriate localities through the normal processes that the state uses in these types of situations. The locality has the ability to require ministerial registration there. The locality, depending upon what's developed, may have additional authority related to tiers so that those operators who lease this out on a regular basis are affected differently, and localities have more ability to control them than someone who's using it very infrequently. That's to be determined, but because there's no specifics in there right now. And the localities have the ability to enforce their existing zoning regulations in the various neighborhoods on these entities, just as they would the homeowners, the property owners themselves. So they continue to do that. So some of the types of things that we heard that were egregious activities that would not have been permitted by someone who was a homeowner disrupting the entire neighborhood would also be prohibited through by locality for these operators as well.
Senator Barker, can you please clarify, did you mean localities can enforce existing zoning regulations? Do you mean by that they could not have further zoning regulations?
I think what was, that certainly needs to be worked out, but one of the things that was incorporated, there are two issues I think that are important there. One is I think there was contemplation in the discussion that there might be existing additional zoning regulations that would be applicable to those people who lease the properties on a very regular basis, so that they were running it more as a business rather than just sort of as a home or a secondary home, a weekend home that they had. So I think at one of the last meeting or meeting before that, I think it was talked about for say if they rented more than 60 days a year, they would be potentially subject to additional regulation that the existing community, existing residential property is not. So that is certainly an option to be incorporated in a bill. And in addition, to make sure, and what was incorporated in the draft that Ms. Wallmeyer put together was to make sure that they could enforce all existing zoning regulations in those communities, so that if, an example that was used for someone coming in to film something in the streets and disrupting the neighborhood, that type of thing, if that's not permitted for the homeowner to do, it's not going to be permitted for someone renting out the home to be able to do that.
Mr. Chairman, just a further clarification from Senator Barker on that top tier that you described related to additional requirements. That would be for those occurrences that are more frequent in nature without actually prescribing what that frequency is at this point. And also the exception on the registration for realtors and property managers.
All right, further questions, comments? All right, so let's get the motion before us. All right, so Elizabeth, do you have it down? Do you want to read it to us, or? All right, I'll try here. So the recommendation is that any bill that would go forward would have that a statewide solution would be part of that. All types of property, we'd have a tiered system, the central tax collection and payment, and then a local option would be part of that also. So that is the motion by Senator Barker, second by Peace. All those in favor say, raise your hand.
Yes,
I see your
my hand is not raised.
Okay, so, all right, so you counting, raise your hand again. Do a roll call then.
Senator Walker?
Yes.
Doug Campbell? Doug Campbell?
No.
Doug Pease? Senator Stanley?
No.
Ms. Lafayette?
Aye.
Mr. Flynn?
No.
So we've got 2 yeses.
You got 3 yeses.
Senator Walker's a no.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
can I make another motion then?
Sure, absolutely.
All right, fantastic. I would move that the commission support some type of frame or a statewide framework in a broad context, and that we also support continued discussion among the stakeholders for hopeful consensus going into the 2017 session. I think that's relatively broad, but I hope it kind of sums up the expression that there is some utility in a statewide framework regardless of what that might entail.
Okay, do we have a second?
Second.
All right, discussion. Seeing none. Let's do another roll call.
Senator Barker?
Yes.
Doug Campbell?
Yes.
Doug Campbell?
Yes.
Doug Marshall?
Yes.
Doug Pease? Of course. Senator Stanley?
No.
Yes.
Yes.
So we have one
Locke.
abstention. Senator Locke?
I didn't hear that.
Senator Locke, I believe that your vote is yes, it's to go forward. With some sort of statewide solution and continued discussions in a very broad context.
I'll go with that.
I told you Elizabeth knows
For
something.
now.
Okay. All right. Anything else on short-term rental